I am John,
And I'm David.
and we are here to have a meaningful discussion on God. So, David, if you would, give me a little bit of background, your relationship as it stands, like progression-wise.
First name David, very biblical. Middle name Joseph, very biblical. However, don't let it fool you. My mom kind of chose those names strategically. She was never very or extremely religious. She grew up going to church, Christian, some sect of Christianity. And so did me and my brother. But maybe around 12, 13, she gave us the choice, say, hey, you guys don't have to go if you don't want to. I kind of went a little bit in the military, but just because they, and don't judge me, they gave us chocolates and candy, and I was in basic training, so it was like the place to go, right? Go get some pot.
I remember that. I definitely remember getting the hookup to get the Sunday morning off and the free hour and a half of people not yelling at you, but instead staying with you. Yeah.
Yep. Everybody went to church in basic training.
I definitely. My mom sang gospel music at my graduation from basic training because she's a gospel singer, and she asked for permission through the church and everything, and they were all about it. And it affected me, but I think that's more of the familial relationship than it was like the higher power aspects of it.
Sure. That's kind of where I am at too. Now, I have a lot of thoughts and feelings on what God may be, and I think some of those feelings will come out in this conversation. But I don't follow one religion at all. Personally, I think they're all somewhat tapping from the same place. But yeah, that's my background.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that there's similar vein. I had the upbringing of shared Catholic, Protestant, kind of splitting down the middle between my parents because they were on both sides of the fence there. And my dad presented kind of the same option for my brother and I, and we kind of, gleefully jumped at the opportunity to not have mornings on Sundays, absolutely consumed by the rigmarole of Catholic Mass. It's
interesting.
It's just really slow, and it's really traditional and it's very European.
In the home or at church?
No, at church. It's just okay. The whole church experience for Catholicism is very unique, but it presents some interesting premises that I think will be useful later in the kind of definition aspect. There's this notion, God the Creator, that's pretty prevalent in kind of the religious aspect universally, but it's interesting that not all religions put so much of a focus on it because it's not as important as the sustaining elements that represent God. And I think that
interesting.
Catholicism really pushes this almost quantum God element of it's in all places, in all time, and knows all things, right? And I think that there's some kind of attachment to those notions in an overarching sense that I have. But then looking at the broader sense of how strongly I am more attached to nature than I am some notion of a higher power representing themselves as human, I think is pretty hard break from the traditional Christian upbringing, is that there's kind of a requirement to believe that at one point God came down to earth.
Yeah.
And I don't know. That's a little ridiculous for me.
Yeah, where's the data?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things in the Bible that are just a little ridiculous to me. And I've read the Bhagavad Gita, and I thought it was phenomenal in the sense of as an artistic piece. I was blown away by how beautiful it was. And the same with I read the Quran while I was in Afghanistan, and it's a beautiful, beautiful book. It's not life-altering text, but I can understand how it could be. In the same way the Bible is, it's really well written for a lot of it. And it has a lot of really good messages for some of it. And so that can carry weight enough for people to be like, this is all I need. I don't need another book to answer the spiritual question of
to feel good.
So I think that, that kind of, it carries weight in my kind of understanding the representation of what I was raised as what God is versus what it could be now, and kind of shifting away from that paradigm and into something that's a little bit more flexible. So I think you'll start with these questions.
Yep, I got a lot already. A few remarks based off of what you said.
Yeah,
I was saving it though.
We got this whole box right here we can fill out under the intro questions.
I also think that like a higher power, I think it's impossible to decouple the fact that God or religion or belief in a higher power helps us function better as human beings. For certain, right?
Yeah,
those two notions are heavily tied.
I definitely think that there's an element of feeling connected to more than just like the small amount of existence that you're exposed to. And I think that the notion of higher powers kind of enables that. Right? It's something that it's considered by a significant component of the population near constantly. If we're doing it. So like that's one of those things where it's like that element of it gives credence to the investigation.
Yeah. What about when back, when human sacrifices were very common in South America, for example, their religion was more of coming from a survival standpoint, right? Like, if I sacrifice X humans, then the gods will bring us food or good weather or etc.
I mean, I feel like that's largely confirmation bias, right? Like,
yeah, I'm curious.
I also don't really know anything like explicitly about.
I don't either.
Blood sacrifice cultures.
I don't either. I've just been thinking about it recently because, I was presented with some of that information from someone recently, and it got me thinking: were they following more modern, Christian, Catholicism, Judaic type religions? I don't think so. I
mean, Christianity has a blood sacrifice in it, so it's like a core testament of it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's communion. You're drinking Jesus' blood. That's like what Catholics literally believe that transubstantiation happens when you take communion and you're eating the body and drinking the blood of Christ. It's not a metaphor. It's real in their mind. So if that's not a blood sacrifice of God, you're literally drinking God's blood. Like, it's spiritual cannibalism. Which is ridiculous, but whatever, teach their own.
That's interesting.
That doesn't need to go in the notes.
Why not?
It can. It doesn't need to. That's all I'm saying.
I'm just taking notes here.
But I think there's distinct disconnects for me from those kind of notions of, like, I think that there's this primal representation, desire for God to be seen as some kind of humanoid, right? That's ridiculous to me. Fundamentally, it's ridiculous to me, right? And the fact that there's this desire to attach godhood to humans in and of itself is still ridiculous. So, like, the whole concept of Jesus being resurrected from the dead and that whole experience, that's ridiculous to me. Muhammad, ridiculous to me, right? Moses, ridiculous to me. But, do the stories that they're in contain seriously important lessons that would benefit the general population to know? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right? So there's this notion that I think you can separate the parable from the person, and when you can do that, you can take a lot of benefit from what is being represented there across the spectrum, right? There's lots of really good lessons in a bunch of different literature, right? Like, I don't know if you've ever read The Prophet, but it is like a 95 pages that is explicitly just that. It's just an outline of bam, 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 right? Going through different perspectives on things.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, and it's told as a bunch of parables, but, like, nobody mystifies the made-up person in The Prophet because he's a made-up person meant to be just passing along goodwill and information, right? It's just the meaning of the story, right? Who he is as the storyteller is irrelevant. And if anything, it's Khalil Gibran, the dude who wrote it, right? and he's just a guy who wrote some books. He's not mystified as this great, spiritual prophet that everybody worships as God. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I've never read it. But then
it's short. It's good. It made me cry the first time I read it.
What did you say the name of it was again?
The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. So, I think that there's an element that personally I'd like to detach from this notion of God found in humanity and make it, escape from the narcissistic elements that religion is so inherently trapped in, right? And that's the desire to make it about us. We're just a part of the machine.
Yeah.
We're not the writers of it,
Yeah. I mean, is that necessarily true?
I currently I think so. I don't think we have the technological capacity to fundamentally alter the existence that we live in at the level that would be necessary for it to we would have to ascend to our own level of godhood. You know what I mean? And I think later we'll get into conversations where we've created things, that represent that, but nobody individually controls it, right?
I think that religions would not survive unless that's, if people believed that it wasn't inherently about us. I think the only reason that religions are around today is because there's still people that believe that, the religions are inherently about us.
Yeah,
about the universe.
I think that there's this core notion that purpose and the meaning of life and everything is this inherently humanistic trait, but there's tons of life out there that continues repopulating and spreading. Fucking sharks are way older than humans, dude. They're
really?
way, way, way older, dude. They're hundreds of millions of years older than humans when you talk about it on an evolutionary timescale. So dude, is the meaning of life for sharks just to fucking be there? Because evidently they're nailing it, dude, comparatively at least.
Oh, this is interesting. ChatGPT. So I asked ChatGPT how old are sharks compared to humans. Sharks, first fossil record of sharks was found 420 million years ago.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They're way older than us, dude. So
humans 300,000. But listen to what ChatGPT said. The earliest known fossils of our species date back to 300,000 years ago. Interesting. Early signs that it considers itself human.
Yeah, dude, it's self-aware. It's a person actually just typing to you. So there's you get what I'm saying though, that there are some religious beliefs that don't have that problem, right?
Yeah.
But they're not around anymore because they've been washed out by a very self-serving notion that religious salvation is found in a person that looks similar to me, in believing in that.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, how do you, let's say we discover aliens, and aliens have some sort of religion as well, that they follow their notion of what God is and higher power and things that they can't sense or understand. How does that compare to our religions? I'm sure there might be some commonalities. Yeah.
I bet you that the commonalities will be that they're the basic foundations of their religions are their astrology or whatever their perspective on astronomy is, because that's it's the consistency between almost every religion. And this is something that I find really interesting, is that Southern Hemisphere religions are so vastly different is because they have different stars.
Interesting.
They just do. They got different stars in the sky. They're on a different side of the planet, So you look across the board on Northern Hemisphere religions, and they're almost identical, and it's because they're all based out of looking at the same fucking thing.
Yeah.
And it's always up there. It's not going anywhere. So it makes sense. And I think that there's truth in a lot of what the things that they're believing in.
Yeah.
And it's just gotten humanized.
They're all tapping from the same place.
I feel like we'll tap into that same place because there's truth to it.
In this conversation?
Yeah.
100%. I couldn't agree more. Would you, slight digression, would you consider a telescope that can see into the fourth dimension, or the process of peering into that fourth dimension and trying to understand it, would you consider that astronomy?
I mean, isn't any telescope looking in the fourth dimension because of how light works?
Well, I mean, it's capturing three-dimensionally propagated light, but it's not to say that that light doesn't also have elements in other dimensions.
But what I mean is, like, you're capturing like a record of the past when you're drawing that light in through a telescope. It's not its current state, it's its past state.
Right.
It's inherently not its current representation.
True.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
All right, let's get down to these questions. Let's go with this first one. Down here with me.
Yes, sir.
What are the characteristics that define? So I think there's a couple that come to mind. Omnipresent. This one's kind of interesting to me. Being in all places at once. I think that this can have a loose definition. So we'll keep this one kind of here. These are just the loose ones we'll put up at the beginning. Timeless. I would say this is from the perspective of humanity. How would humanity define? How are we going to define it? Because, like, you know, I think that there's the scope of the human experience, and then there's the larger scale scope, right? So we'll start with the small scale scope of, like, it's got to be present for longer than your lifetime. It's got to be ubiquitous. Its effect has to be meaningful, right? So, like, it's got to be something that you would be able to perceive, I think.
It's interesting if you think about God being timeless, because then it doesn't know you in your current form. It knows you in your entire timeline.
Yeah.
Right? And that's its perspective of you. That's interesting, right? If God is timeless...
I think...
What kind of timeless? Future time or just past time?
I think that these three categories right here, these three characteristics are enough that it will adequately define anything both in the scope of the universe and outside of scope, and still exclude things that would be like false gods.
I don't know. I think there's a lot here like benevolence, right?
I don't think that that's an important thing. I don't think that that's a characteristic of God. I think that that's a humanistic characteristic, right? I think that what really represents godhood is that it's always there, it's never going away, and it has an impact on you.
What about like gods or like justice, right? Like there's certain gods in Norse mythology that are
right. Those are just human notions. That's just emotion presented over time, right?
Okay.
That's not like justice changes, right? Like there was a time period historically you could go back and look that a person who was a slave in America was caught and tried for treason and argued that he couldn't be tried for treason because he was property, and was let off because his argument was correct and legally was bound. But is that like moralistically both A, a good argument, and B, make any sense? No, justice changes, right? That dude got justice, but in like the weirdest, most roundabout way possible. So like,
yeah, I'm playing devil's advocate here. What about transcendence?
And that's the thing is, I think that these are still like, they're human notions, right? I'm talking about like the scope of what I'm talking about, I think it's broader than that, right? Like something that's omnipresent, timeless, and has a meaningful effect. It has that regardless of if it's on me, if it's on you, if it's on an animal, right? As long as it's, right, like I think anything that's living on the planet would share in this experience of being affected by something that is omnipresent, timeless, and has a meaningful effect, right? That's what this categorizing set, like, you know, is the criminal justice system, is that ubiquitous? Right? Do they have that in Panther culture? Probably not. You know what I mean?
What about imminent?
That's not timeless. That's the opposite of timeless.
It's the opposite of transcendence, I think. So it's God is present and actively involved within the world and human affairs. Very human-centric for sure.
That's omnipresent.
Yeah, it's omnipresent, exactly. It's a subset of omnipresent.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. We don't need those subsets.
I'm playing devil's advocate here with some ChatGPT generated responses. So I appreciate it. Most of this stuff is very human-centric, isn't it? It's interesting. What about omnipotent? I guess we were.
I don't think omnipotent I think is a human thing. right? Because like, what is knowledge, right? Like, let me give you something that'll really with your perspective on this. Everything that you've ever consumed as information, it's missing a massive amount of information because you don't perceive light the same way that, let's say, a mantis shrimp does, right? They see way more colors than we do. Like not just like different iterations of colors. They see colors that we don't know exist. So like, what about existence have we been missing out on? So like,
well, we know they exist. We just can't process that wavelength.
Exactly, but
as a color. Yeah.
So like, omniscience is kind of weird because it's to know all things is, I think, an unknowable. It's an unreachable requirement, right? Like, and I think the 3-body problem, the like actual math problem, is a good representation of why.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, it's too complicated. The systems are too complicated, and there's too much information being transferred constantly, and too much chaos and entropy in it for that to be a bar that could be reached by anything.
Yeah. Slight digression. That book was actually a 4-body problem. There was 3 suns and 1 planet.
Interesting.
It irritated me so much and the guy who wrote the book was a physicist as well.
Kind of frustrating.
It's a great book. Highly recommend.
All right. So I think in the categorization aspect, we can kind of put these. There's the notion of inside our universe and outside our universe.
Can we define omnipresent, timeless, and meaningful effect first?
Yeah.
Yeah, just so we have definitions that we can all agree on.
Let's do a little line. We'll say this. This literally means it's always present, right? And this is from the perspective, I think it's key that it's perspective from whatever individual is experiencing it, right? So like, is God to me going to be the same as God to the giant coniferous forest that's in Oregon that's like 15,000 years old? Maybe, right? There might be some things that aren't God to it that are God to me, right? Like, and the kind of the lower echelons, things like the internet might be closer to being God for me than it is for a bunch of trees. But we might agree that the planet's really important.
Yeah.
And I think timeless kind of goes into this notion as well, where it's,
I want to strictly define timeless because there's
this notion that I want to specifically get to on timeless, that it's for the perspective of the person who's experiencing it, the life that's experiencing it. Maybe not life, right? You could be talking about the molecular level, right? The existence of some electron, proton, and neutron combination before it gets turned into something else, right? Whatever its existence is in its state, it extends before and after that. So
after?
Yeah, before and after. It like, so
free will doesn't exist.
After I die. Well, no. After I die, right? Like, let's say after I die, the sun's still going to be there. It doesn't disappear because I died.
Sure.
It stops existing for me, but that's because I died. It didn't explode and disappear. I died, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I mean by timeless, is that after I die, this thing still exists. It's still going to have an impact.
Got it. So it's not coupled. It's
my existence isn't coupled to its existence.
God didn't create the universe for us. God created the universe for life in the universe, you might say. Or maybe we need to define that. It's just because, like, if you go back to the Bible and everything, right? Like, it got very specifically created the earth so that Adam and Eve could, have a place in the Garden of Eden.
It's
very human-centric.
It's narcissism.
Yeah, it's narcissism,
it's just,
right?
It's just.
So we're trying timeless in the sense we're decoupling humans from God. Yeah. Okay.
And then the meaningful effect is its impact has to be like actually perceivable, right? Like gravity is a great representation of this. You don't perceive gravity until you stop feeling it. And then when you have that, I don't know if you've ever been in a zero-G environment, like like an arc on a plane. Dude, you should go with someone who has a private pilot's license to do a zero-G drop, because it's surreal. Like, you literally just feel weightless because the plane is shifting in real time at negative gravity speeds, and you're just falling with it. And it's terrifying in a poorly secured plane because like, there's like shit flying all around you.
Yeah.
But it's a cool experience to go feel because like that really helps quantify what gravity actually is to be released from it, at least in a like pseudo manner, right? So that's same kind of environment, right? Like the effect of the sun, pretty meaningful.
Yeah. I like these. These are good definitions. Do you feel like omnitemporal should be on this list, or at least a definition for it?
No, I don't think it's omnitemporal because that implies that it's always existed. And I think always existed is very different from my perception of this is that it's always been here. Those are two different requirements. My perception of this is it's always been here and will always be here, and it's always existed are two very different things. Because like, the Earth's only, 4 billion years old, right? So like, there's like 2/3 of the universe's existence where we weren't even at the party yet. We were...
we were still rocks. Yeah, space dust.
So, and I think that gets to a good point, though, of there is the universe experience gods, right? That's the stuff that we really deal with, and then there's the stuff beyond it, right? And I think that's the kind of creator question really gets answered in this outside space. It can't be answered in the inside space. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Because you're inside the thing you created. Like, so these things split here, and I think that these are pretty much this question. From here on out, the outside is this, and then all of these effects are for this.
Right.
Because these rules, they don't have to apply outside the universal representation. You know what I mean? That's logic essentially breaks down, so we have to approach it, I think, detached from hard rules and approach it more from general understandings and or I guess loose rules and approach it from more like general understandings and existent laws of nature.
What about meaningful effect? What am I?
It's just the constant impact that it has on you. It's like gravity. We just talked about this.
Okay. No, I'm trying to define things very specific because I'm basically gonna start building things off of this, right? Much like I define what atoms and everything are, then I start building a model off of it. So I want to strictly define some of these concepts.
And I think for this inside section, we have upper, this looks terrible, upper and lower. And this is pretty much split on the delineation, how strong the impact is. There's a clear notion of like something that's impacting constantly that we are aware of, and something that's impacting constantly that we have no real heavy cognizance of.
I was thinking about this meaningful effect thing, and it's interesting too, because this even extends to the idea of not anarchy, atheism. Even the idea of saying omitting God perspective still changes, has a meaningful effect on the way that you interact with the universe, right? So even the absence of it is still a meaningful effect, and I think that's interesting. I think that's really interesting.
So let's get some examples down here at number 3. Let's scroll down a little bit.
Yep.
I think the clear ones, super obvious ones, are the sun, the earth. We'll start with these as some obvious ones. So, the sun's obvious. It's the foundation of life on our planet. It's a core foundation is a broad oversimplification of how life started on our planet, but it is a core requirement for life to have started, is coming from the benefits that the sun provides and the fortunate distance that we have from it in our Goldilocks zone. Yeah.
What about physical laws, right? Because neither of those two things would exist without the physical laws that cause them to exist. So, for example, nuclear strong force.
I fundamentally agree with you that those concepts to me are they're more like truisms than they are like gods. You get what I'm saying? It's like the commandments of the universe, right? Like the relationship, and this is something that I think that you're going to find really interesting, is I think that the representation that they have in our universe is an outcome of the interaction that caused our universe, right? So they could be different, if that interaction was fundamentally different, right? Like,
kind of like the gods above, the notion that he puts forward in that book.
Like gravity could be an inverted proportion instead of whatever the proportion is currently, right? Like the weight to force. So like there's like this notion that like I think that those exist in my mind as representations of, they're like the code that our universe is built off of, if that makes sense.
Do you think God is built off of that code?
I don't know. I think these low like inside level gods, absolutely. Right? Clearly. Right? It's the building blocks that the language of the universe is extrapolated out of. So yeah, like the whole process of nuclear fusion, creating quasars and shit, and that releasing cosmic fucking levels of energy and lots of mass into the universe and creating planets and galaxies and solar systems and shit is like, clearly it's the representation of that process like happening in real time. So like I think that they're at the scope of what they I think is the way that the gods that we're defining are felt, right? Like gravity is how we feel the earth, right? You can like feel it, but like the constant feeling that you have in relation to the earth is gravity. But like going out and touching it and everything, that's extra. But the attraction feeling is the relationship you're feeling with the earth, in the same way that there's the electromagnetic feelings that you're feeling from sunlight hitting you, right? Those electromagnetic waves hitting you and ultraviolet rays like hitting you, you directly feel the impacts of that. So I
mean, you could extend that and say that meaningful effect is a force. Then there might be a force of God.
Also, I think our other examples, let's say we got the sun, the earth.
One could put electromagnetism in, it's because it definitely serves as a protective barrier from extrastellar rays and things like that. Jupiter, right? Yeah. The absorptive.
Jupiter's a good one.
Jupiter, the absorptive bully of our atmosphere, of our solar system.
I think kind of in that regard,
the punching bag.
In the regard of defensive aspects, I think the atmosphere representation is one as well, where the combination effect of ozone and oxygen and nitrogen and all of the different chemical elements that are in our atmosphere not only provide life, but they provide security. They provide the ability to breathe in the vacuum of space. Thank God for that one thing. Otherwise, how would we be surviving? And I think, in that regard, macro sense ocean falls into that category as well.
Yes, water for sure. The lifeblood.
I think those are good.
I think that's good. Yeah, I think that's good.
If we come across any more, throw them on the list.
Yeah.
Beyond the scope of human existence, this is where we get to the creator question. Well, I think there's kind of two sides to this. We talked about earlier if there's like extremophile life in a frozen ocean on a moon outside of Saturn.
Okay.
Like the existence that they have, their oceans, their moon that they live on, Saturn are their gods because it's outside of the existence that we have, if that exists. Right. But in a similar vein, like we share the same 5 kind of pantheon with pretty much every life form that's on Earth.
Yep.
They're all kind of semi-reliant on it in some regard.
Yes.
So I think that there's this notion that like the local system for any life form presents its primary pantheon until
boundary conditions help formulate the pantheon.
Until you really don't get the capacity to escape that until you have like consistent,
you could actually
like
say that
solar plus level travel, you know what I mean, like the ability to go to another star. At no point do you like, even then, the ability to go to another star, like you're just adopting a new pantheon the second you land.
You could say there's a generating function for the pantheon, and it's a generator of local conditions, language, culture, and maybe some other stuff.
I would say it's local conditions and then competition.
Oh, that's a good one.
Like it's just resource competition after local conditions are met. Everything that comes after that is just allocating resources.
It's a subset of. Yeah, I like it.
So, but I think that there's this, this creation aspect of when you get to the macro scale of beyond the universe scope, that there's this notion for a driving force to have triggered the Genesis event for the universe as like a whole thing. I think that there's logical arguments that could be made for it. I think that we'll as we progress through these, we'll get to the conversation. But like, does it have a meaningful effect that's timeless and omnipresent? I think it's kind of yes and no, right? Because like if there is a programmatic effect on the creation of the universe that establishes this, set of universal commandments down, then clearly that interaction,
there's something outside of it,
was omnipresent, timeless, and had a meaningful effect. It fulfills the conditions.
Yeah. I might even put the moon as a lower.
Yeah, you think?
Honestly. Because I'm trying to say, like, how are we what's the difference between upper and lower? What is the difference between upper and lower? Like,
I think
a measured effect.
I think it's how much the impact would be noticeable if it wasn't there, right? So like a good example of this is the internet, right? I think the internet fits in a weird state comfortably in this lower inner kind of categorization.
We might still exist and we might find a way to fight on, but it would have very catastrophic effects.
Yeah, it'd be rough.
Of disappeared, yeah.
It would be rough, but it'd be fine.
We'd still be alive.
Right, and like
a lot of us might die
in the same boat. Like if Jupiter disappeared, would the solar system be fundamentally different? Probably, yes. I'm not going to disagree with that. But let's say that it doesn't have like a gravity altering like nightmare effect, and everybody dies from that alone, and everybody survives Jupiter just disappearing. Are we going to die from a comet immediately? Like not getting sucked up by Jupiter? Probably not. So like. But will it eventually probably happen because Jupiter is not there? Probably. So like, does that timeless effect carry over to, I think, here's the way that I would represent it, is the timeless effect, if it's removed, still apparent, right? So like if you remove the atmosphere, everybody dies.
Yeah.
Right? If you remove the oceans, everybody dies. If you remove the earth, everybody dies. If you remove the sun, everybody dies, right? Because immediately everybody's gone because you removed conditions for life. But if you remove the internet, if you remove Jupiter, the asteroid belt, I don't know about the moon. I think the moon kind of is one of those things where its effect because of gravity is strong enough that the tidal forces alone would kill everybody.
I think the moon for sure is an upper. Yeah. I think if the moon disappeared, we would all die. Let's see. I'm actually curious about that. I'm pretty sure that it would have catastrophic effects. Tides would change, ecosystems, climate, culture, and tradition. It might be a lower effect, to be honest.
Dude, the impact it would have on women everywhere would be Titanic, dude. It would be bigger than the Titanic. That's what I've said. I think kind of in that.
Okay, so here's an interesting statement. Many organisms, especially those in coastal areas, rely on the regular tidal cycles for their survival and reproduction. So if we're decoupling this, if we're looking at this in a timeless way, then yes, it would be catastrophic for many forms of life on this planet.
Yeah, I think
it would be upper.
It's kind of like right on the bottom.
Yeah, right on the edge. Yeah. But for us, we probably would be able to fight through it. Maybe. Yeah. Yeah. This is, again, ChatGPT giving me a quick answer. So the fate of the universe rests in ChatGPT's prediction. Or the fate of Earth, at least.
So, and then I think this outer side is kind of it's a more complex conversation that it kind of taps into a bunch of different things.
Yeah.
Where the kind of real experience of the gods that we feel and can touch and can see, right? Like I can go outside and look up and see the sun and the sky, and I can go drive 20 minutes and go get in the ocean. I wouldn't because it's freezing, but I can, right? And because of that, there's this real element to these gods that I think that you can give a lot of credence to, of the ones that are important to be maintained because their impact on us is as kind of important as ours should be on them, right?
Yeah.
Like fundamentally, it sounds a little preachy, but it's like if you were a microbe on a living creature, an organism, you're kind of dependent on that thing surviving. So like it's not in the best interest of a small group of microbes to kill the organism if it means everything is going to die. In the same way that like depleting the atmosphere would be bad, or changing the ocean dramatically, making it like crazy salinated or inhospitable for life. I think it's something that it's a responsibility, I think, as cognizant beings that we inherently have to nurture the timeless nature of the existent paradigm.
That's an interesting statement.
But I think people get really caught up on the philosophical question of what got us here.
That's interesting, right? Because you're basically saying it's our duty to the universal God to nurture this timeless property.
It's the execution of the code function.
Whereas a lot of religions think it's God's duty, right, to basically generate them. It's our duty to follow like its commandments or something like that. I don't know. That's an interesting thought. How does that notion compare to how we follow religion and what we do for that religion?
This gets kind of the other side of it, though, of what created us, right? And what's outside the universe, right? Because like we have this responsibility, like I think we have this responsibility to care for the systems that provide the ability for us to live. I don't think that that's a wild statement. But like that notion inherently is coming from an understanding that there is a possibility that it's much bigger.
That existence isn't here only for us.
Yeah.
We're just lucky enough to find an equilibrium point within this giant system. And if we don't nurture and maintain that equilibrium point, we have nowhere to exist.
Yeah, it is. I mean, haven't found another one, so.
No, yeah. Well, we found some Goldilocks planets, but we can't get there.
Yeah, we haven't found one close.
With current technology. Yeah, for sure.
So it gets to the notion of like, what is the outside God, though, right? And
here's an interesting one. Where would you put light? Because a lot of religions, would want to put that somewhere. Do we want to put that somewhere?
It's electromagnetic radiation. We talked about this. Yeah. It's a universal commandment. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like a universal commandment. Yeah.
It's something that it's a rule that was dictated by the interaction that caused the Big Bang. And I think that this is
light is a manifestation of electromagnetism, much like the Earth, much like the Earth is a manifestation of gravity, and a few other of the universal commandments. But
no, I get what you're saying. What I'm saying is like, in the regard of, we see light as like the expression. It's like, is probably the best way. Like, so our primary reception of light comes from the sun, but that's already listed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. True.
And so we could put stars, but that every star would have to get listed for the light and gravity that it provides.
It doesn't provide, again, if those stars disappeared, it wouldn't provide an upper or lower effect. Yeah.
Minimal, right? So because of that, it's like, is light more than just this property of nature that is an outcome of, the spin characteristics of our Big Bang specifically?
Yeah. I mean, it provides information. It transfers information from me to you, or one system to another. And I just don't know if that information, if light went away, I mean, that would be the most catastrophic effect on all of us. But that would be like saying one of the universal commandments went away, right? Because that's what would have to happen. And if if any of these universal commandments disappeared, obviously it would be catastrophic. Yeah. So I agree with you. It doesn't belong anymore. It's just a manifestation.
It's a property of the initial interaction, right? And I think that this is a really good segue to defining this outer relationship. Is so prior to where we are now, the universe has been expanding. So at one point, going back in time, contract down to the singularity, right? And we've had this conversation a couple of times where the fundamental nature of the singularity prior to the Big Bang is a steady state singularity because it contains everything. So there's no adjustment being made against it. It is a singularity that isn't in an expanding state. So it's in a steady state, right? Like just basic logical representation of this argument. And so with that, it's got time, space, all mass, all data, information of our universe coalesced, right? And I think in a very similar sense to the dual slit experiment, which I'll talk about in a second, the steady state was disrupted and changed into the expanding state, and that interaction is what gave the universal commandment like specifications, right? So like the relationship between mass and how much gravity it creates, or the relationship between how light presents itself in a visible framework in the electromagnetic range, right? So like all of the different little parameters and aspects were encoded in that interaction event and transferred. And that transfer of energy specifically is something that's represented in the electron representation of the dual slit experiment. Which, I mean, if you want to talk about this is your bread and butter as a physicist.
I mean, I gotta go. I don't know it in this context. What do you...
So the dual slit experiment, in the initial representation of it as light, is that you're measuring individual photons, right? But there's this extension of it in the quantum kind of understanding that when you're doing it with electrons, you can't measure an electron without hitting it with another electron.
Yeah.
And that hitting it with another electron is fundamentally changing the first electron. So that interaction is what's collapsing the wave function.
Yeah.
Right? That measurement. And so that interaction, if you extrapolate it to the cosmic scale of there's this steady state singularity, and then I measure it.
Oh, I see.
Then
Interesting.
that measurement transferred on what was steady, now a specified set of coded instructions that are gravity's relationship, like the Planck constant, all of that, right? All of that information is extrapolated because the measurement was made using something that contained that information already.
And our universal wave function collapsed into something
into existence, right? And so there's this notion in string theory, and specifically in M theory, that there are multidimensional brains that are folded on top of each other, right? And that our strings coalesce reality in 4 dimensions, where we're in 3 and we experience the 4th through time, right? And it's just the vibration, the rotation of the strings specifically is what's generating these dimensions. And if you had different string rotation, because it's a one-dimensional string, it's kind of hard to present this, but if you had a different string rotation hit at the initial point of interaction, maybe instead of it being X, Y, and Z with T, it's 3 other sets of dimensions and then tau.
2 time or something.
Yeah, right? It's some other representation of time. And so you have all of these different potential iterations of cosmic reality that it could be existing. And it's just how it gets measured that determines what is, right? And then as it's expanding, this giant bubble of a universe is expanding by transforming inert strings that don't have a rotation. It's just adding them into it by giving them that rotation as it expands out into it. As it meets new inert material, that information is being added, right? And the black holes, as part of the information that's being consumed, is that spin information, right? And it's reintroducing inert strings back into this cosmic ether that universes expand and disappear in, right? So there's this constant supply of, universal string passage that's happening as the universe is expanding, inert strings are being consumed, and as black holes are being formed and supergravity events are happening, inert strings are being reintroduced into the ether in holes, right?
Yeah. What do we mean by ether, real quick?
It's just a general
old
term.
universe?
The general term for the macro space dimensionally that the universe is being created in, right? It's just
Got it.
It's just some dimensional representation. We can call it one. It actually makes most sense to me to call it one, and then to say that there are some set of spatial dimensions and some set of time dimensions, and then just this top level dimension that is energizing existence out of rotation.
Got it. Okay. Got it. I love that idea. That's such a fun
right? And so
representation of what might be.
so there's this notion that like our universe, all of our gods that we've outlined, all these lower and upper inner gods are just a statistical representation of this interaction.
Yeah.
It literally is going to happen regardless, right? And it's something that I think that if it is the true representation, then it's something that's happening constantly. That there are people that are hitting the realization, people, things, life, whatever, that there's this interconnected nature that is intrinsic beyond the scope of universal existence, right? And what that notion is that if you took away the spin, if you took away the cosmic energy, the programming that's coming from these universal commandments, fundamentally, it's all strings. And these strings are all universally identical, and what is making them unique is energy that's being extrapolated over immense amounts of time.
Yeah. So I guess I want to call it the true universe, the universe that our universe came from. There is really no God. It came from those true universal commandments extending themselves into our universe. And then it's our existence here.
It's an unknowable thing, right? It's like one of those, what's sending the interaction, right? Like the
what's
Big Bang,
initiating the interaction.
Yeah, before the Big Bang became the Big Bang, it was fine. It was chilling. It was doing its own thing, vibing. And then some asshole in the first dimension was like, yo, what up? And then it was like, now I gotta live, right? So like is that a hyperdimensional creature? Is it literally the creatures from Flatland in the one-dimensional space that are trapped in a line and don't know if they're first or last? Right?
Yeah.
Are you the first unit on the line or are you the last unit on the line? Is the line a circle?
Yeah.
Right? Do you even know if the line is a circle if it's a one-dimensional space, right?
Yeah. No, I don't think you do. Yeah. You're just going forward or backwards.
So there's definitely you're getting into one of the, I think, the core elements that I think makes this so interesting in the cosmological scale is that it's so unknowable, right? There are some logical consistencies we can take out of how we know physics works regardless of, weird quantum, interactions. And I think that that's a core element of this is it's like those quantum interactions where you're seeing like antimatter and like positrons and gluons and all of these like really deep mathematical representations of reality is tapping into being able to see kind of different representations of dimensional universes in the same ether in different configurations, and they just don't share the same space, right? It's just an element of it, right? It's like, let's say antimatter positrons, let's make up something, right? Is just, positron in a universe that has the Y dimension removed and instead a B as the dimension.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just, that's what it is there. And we're getting it as some quantum tunneling representation of it just comes into our universe because part of its spin information was deleted by a black hole that it got like partially consumed by, and then now it quantum tunneled into our existence, and then bam, here's a positron.
Yeah.
But where did it come from? Nobody knows, right?
Yeah.
So that's one of those things is like there's these elements of the quantum facets of existence where it bends reality and says, I don't have to function the way that you do, and I'm going to go around it. And I think that bends a little bit, or that gives a little bit of credence to there's this capacity to temporarily escape the bounds of the universal commandments at a micro level. Like, it's the smallest possible level, because if it's at any bigger level, it gets eradicated by not being, cogent with reality.
Yeah.
In the same way that, like, if something that came into our reality only shared 2 dimensions out of the 4, it would delete, right? It would be an excruciating existence if you just came and you didn't have height as a dimension, and you just had width and depth, and time was going backwards for you. You know what I'm saying? Like, but at an individual string level, is that an excruciating existence, or is that you popping in, quantum tunneling, and then eradicating back to the existence that you were in?
Yeah, immediately giving off all your energy and just going back to where you were, right? Yeah, that's funny. Time is a flat circle, man. Literally.
Ben.
A pancake moving in reverse.
I think that gives us a pretty good pantheon. What do you think?
I love it. Love it. I'm very blessed to have interesting friends that always have crazy ideas of what the universe and existence actually is. I have another buddy of mine that got me into physics, Charlie. He's got a pretty interesting idea for what the universe is.
We'll have to get him this.
Yeah, I think I'll have to get him on here and have him explain. Yeah, also, exactly. He'll love this.
Well, this has been a meaningful discussion. I'm John.
I'm David.
I hope you guys have a good day.
Happy Memorial Day.